Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with Portland, Oregon native, New York-based jazz drummer Towner Galaher. He opened up with the show about his new 2023 CD, the Towner Galaher Organ Trio Live. We got into his life as an educator and retiring after years in public education, an early Art Blakey live show, his love of jazz, and so much more. This new project is his fourth as a leader and was recorded at a private event for intimate friends and family at Daddy Jack's in New London, Connecticut, during the lockdown. He's got a great story, a lot of stories. Enjoy this interview.
Hi, Towner. It's Joe Domino.
Hey, Joe. Thank you so much, man, for having me on your show.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Great to meet you, and I appreciate you taking time out.
My pleasure completely, man.
So before we get into your album, The Organ Trio Live, I want to know with COVID, it was a rough time for musicians. A lot went into it this last 3 years. How did you survive it? How has it changed the way that you conduct things now?
That is an excellent question. So, I would say being a person who's going to turn 68 next Friday, I've learned, not just from COVID, but from many things in my life, patience is a virtue, something that my mother pounded into me probably hundreds of times, and, also because I had two daughters, I worked for 21 years in public education, so I retired in 2019. And, I was expecting just, to go full blast with the gigging, I remarried in December that year to a lovely woman from Kenya, who actually was in Kansas City last year. All this to say that it was kind of like a cruel joke when March 2020, everything was shut down, But actually this opportunity came up at Daddy Jack's, where we had been gigging somewhat regularly, to come up there and, do this performance for a small, intimate audience. And they had a recording engineer there. So, I was delighted to do that and just kind of, bided my time. And I keep, woodshedding and practicing and, being patient. But things did open up. But it was brutal for, not just musicians, but all artists of all forms. I mean, Broadway, you name it, whatever it was, but musicians for sure, that was really brutal. But we're coming out of it, and it's all about just looking forward to the future.
So talk to me about what it means to release an album now after going through all of that. Because I made my first CD actually literally on my 50th birthday. It was called Panorama, and I made another CD 3 years later, exactly to the date, and my third CD about 3 years later in August of 2011, and had some fantastic players on there. That third one was the first one I did with an organ, which featured Pat Bianchi. It was exciting, and I was writing most of the music myself and drumming and being the producer and everything like that. And then just because of the financial aspect, I was kind of like on hold for a little over a decade, about 11 years, so I could release my fourth CD. So this is very liberating for me. I would say that would be my first word of choice, and exciting, and I just saw it today. We're already number 82 on the Jazz Week chart. So we're in the top 100 and climbing. We've gotten, within 2 days after the CD was released, we had 7 reviews. And I was just told a few days ago that we're going to be featured in the July issue of Downbeat magazine, the holy grail, for jazz publications. So it's thrilling, it's exciting, and I'm glad that I have developed perseverance in my life, because it's definitely paying dividends. Wonderful. Yeah, to get into that mecca of a magazine, that sounds like everything's taken off. So, and it sounds like, too, I know you have a career in public education. Sounds like everything kind of started late for you, but let's go to the beginnings of your life, born and raised, and how the seeds
and the beginnings of jazz began for you?
Absolutely. That's a great question. So I was born in Portland, Oregon. I was fourth generation Oregonian. My great-grandparents came out before the Civil War, covered wagon and so forth like that. So I was very much a native, Oregonian. About 2 months before my 9th birthday, I watched the Beatles hunt Ed Sullivan, and at the end of the second song, I remember the camera zoomed in on Ringo, and something went off like an electric shock or a light bulb in me, and I said, that looks so cool. That's what I want to do for the rest of my life, and that's what kind of kicked it off. So, like everybody else, I grew up with the Rolling Stones and the Beatles. Then when the hard rock, the Who and Hendrix and Jeff Beck came along, I jumped right onto that. And then when I turned up like 19, I started switching heavily into, Earth, Wind and Fire, Stevie Wonder, soul, funk, stuff like that, And then I encountered a great mentor, Mel Brown. He's a drummer. He's still active out there in Portland. And he was a jazz drummer, but he had made his living playing with the Temptations and the Supremes, and later went on to tour with Diana Ross when she was at her peak. But he was befriended Philly Joe Jones, and was a very serious jazz musician. And he had a drum store, and he had the whole wall pictures of Thelonious Monk and Art Blakey, and so I started listening seriously to jazz from his influence. And actually he made his recording debut with an organ group, Billy Larkin and the Delegates. I think he was about 19 or 20. That was his first. He was in that band before he went on to play with Motown and so forth like that. So I had a connection to the organ right from that as well, And then one day, I was walking through what they call Old Town Portland, and Art Blakey, who was not at a really high point in his career that time in the 70s, was playing a very small little jazz venue, and there was an afternoon thing, and I just, grabbed a ticket and walked in there, and I sat literally about 2.5 feet from his hi-hat. and I became a convert right there. I mean, those are kind of like, I don't know, is it mystical or whatever, just, experiences that are life-altering that just seem destined to happen. And so, I started really getting into Max Roach and Art Blakey, and later on, of course, Elvin and Tony, and, got into jazz like that.
Wow, that's a great story. Was Bobby Watson on stage?
No, but I did see him in later incarnations. And then there was a Sunday jam session run by this drummer named Ron Steen, who's still doing it out there. And I used to go down there to try to hone my skills playing straight ahead jazz. And it was my turn. I was up on the stage, and Art Blakey was in town, and Donald Harrison and the trumpeter, his friend, what's his name? I'll think of it in a second. But they came in and they jumped up on the stage, and they were jamming, blowing their brains out. Terrence Blanchard, And then later on, decades later, Donald Harrison played on my third record. But at that time, he was about 24, 25, playing in Art Blakey's band, So that was another great experience. But really, coming to New York in 1986 was the watershed moment for me. And I really, I met Mike Clark, who played with Herbie Hancock and the Headhunters, but had played with Woody Shaw and all these great people. He was amazing and still is straight ahead jazz player of the baddest, degree. And, he really, really solidified my commitment to go 100% into the jazz, category.
Yeah, I love Mike. Yeah, he's a great cat. I've had him on the show a few times, and he's got a fierce
I just saw him with Eddie Henderson like a week and a half ago, and it was brutal. It was awesome, and what a fantastic band. And Donald Harrison is in that band as well.
So let me ask you this. You've been around quite a bit. You talked about New York, and you've been on stages all over the place.
What was the stage that you got on that you always dreamed that you would play on? Like a kind of a rival moment for you where you had to almost pinch yourself and say, wow, this is happening?
That's kind of an interesting question. I don't know if I could immediately come up with an answer for that. It probably wasn't like some giant, well, actually, no. Okay, here's what it was. So when I was doing my master's degree and studying composition and arranging at Queens College, yes, this is a perfect answer for that. So Hillary Clinton was coming. There was a thing where there were 6 places in the United States that were going to be designated as these very important African American landmarks. One was one of the first black churches it was in somewhere in New England. And Louis Armstrong's home was going to be officially created into a museum, and that was one of them. So there was this big event at the Colden Center, and they brought out these charts that Louis Armstrong had a big band in the 1940s, and nobody had played these charts in over something like 30 or 40 years. And we were given the privilege to play these charts with the Queens College Big Band, who I was the drummer with. And so, what's his name? Hendrix, the guy who was in Hendrix, Lambert, and Ross. He sang, and Arvell Shaw, the bass player who had played with Louis Armstrong for 25 years in the All-Stars, played bass. Wynton Marsalis came up on stage. And so that was it. I was on this huge stage. Not only that, but in the audience was Tito Puente, Max Roach, and Jimmy Heath, and Lionel Hampton, who I actually spoke to several of them after the show. Max Roach asked me if I was on the college staff there. I said, no, I'm just, and he complimented my playing. That was really thrilling. So I would say that was definitely the moment.
So you've been around a lot of big players, legends, luminaries, veterans in your life, and you've been an educator. What did you take from those individuals that you were around and ultimately give to the younger people and students that exist that were in your classroom that you taught? What did you teach them from what you got from the elders?
That's a fantastic question, and I wanted to actually touch on this because I use the word mentoring or mentorship is such an important part of any endeavor, but in music it's very important, and I feel it's slipped tremendously in the last several decades. And I've had long discussions with Lenny White and Mike Clark about this. They have very strong feelings about this, But back then, if you go all the way back, it was all about apprenticeship and mentoring, and all the great musicians that stood on the shoulders of the other people. It was all about that, So, for example, when I was teaching, I would, first of all, I taught band, so I had to learn all the instruments on some level. But if I was teaching a kid clarinet or trombone or trumpet or anything, I would ask them, tell me who's the name of a famous trumpet player, whatever instrument they had chosen. And, 97% of them couldn't think of anybody. So I would tell them I'm giving them some suggestions, but also tell them to research it, because, for example, when I was about 15, I was taking drum lessons in Portland, and Count Basie must have been in town because Sonny Payne came into the drum shop, and he knew my teacher, Dick Hall. And he came in, hey, man, they were giving me high fives and everything like that. And then he sat down at this drum set that was on, for sale in the front room, and just played this ridiculous stuff that my jaw was on the floor, literally, And so it's important to be exposed, best of all in person, but secondary through videos or something like that. The people coming up have to be exposed to people, high-level people on these instruments, so they could, first of all, see what the possibilities are, right? But I also taught music appreciation. I would do things. I would teach them about people like Louis Moreau Gottschalk, who Roland Hannon Roland Hanna taught me about, that most people don't even know who he was, and, all these other people. I would teach him about Ray Charles. I would teach him, about Mahalia Jackson, and I would do little 2 or 3 page, excerpts on the people that were the top pioneers in the different, and I taught him about all the different genres of music as well.
So I'm curious, in this long journey that you've been in music, between educating, performance, putting out albums, what has been the most enjoyable part of being a professional musician for you?
Just, the childlike purity. I was reading something just yesterday that was talking philosophically that a person that maintains the heart of a child throughout their life is really the winner, and be a person that will stay forever youthful. And so that magical feeling of me when I saw Ringo Starr on the Ed Sullivan Show, or Sonny Payne, playing those inspirational things, or my first experiences playing even with my high school friends, some of them were very, very good, but just that electrifying feeling of you're locked in and clicking. And I wanted to talk in relationship to my album too about 2 important words: chemistry and telepathy. So those are kind of things that can never be taught in a music school. But when you feel those things when you're playing music, it's priceless. You could never put a price on those feelings. And, I was thinking, actually, there's a funny lyric from a Dr. John song where he's doing a little rap in the middle of the song. And then the end of the rap concludes with, he says, "This line of work I could hardly recommend, but it's too late. I'll be doing it to the end." And when I heard that, I said, that's me 100%. So, like me, like every other musician, I mean, I played with Fred Wesley, played on one of my CDs, and he has a biography, and he went through the entire roller coaster, from the highest highs to the lowest lows. He experienced it all, and he's doing great now. But my point is that, a music career is not usually a steady path, and there's all sorts of, peaks and valleys, but it's that initial passion and just love for the music that is what, sustains me, and I'm sure probably like-minded musicians.
So as somebody that's a practitioner or an educator of this idiom art form known as jazz, why do you love it?
The creativity. I did 3 off-Broadway or semi-Broadway shows, and like somebody said, it's like kind of like Groundhog Day or something. Like, you wake up in the morning and you're reading the April 20th version of the New York Times for the 750th time. You know what I mean? You can't, some people, I know, I have friends and I respect and admire them. They've done it for over 30 years. They just go from one show to the next show to the next show, but yeah, I did a show in Roanoke, Virginia, Forever Patsy, about Patsy Cline. And the second to last night, I had one line in the, where they asked me a question because we were on stage, and I was so bored, I just decided to stand up and deliver the line rather than sitting down. And I was called into the office after the show and yelled at, "Why did you do that?" And then, so with the whole thing of jazz, of course, it's just like life. You never feel the same way from day to day, depending on the weather or what happened in your personal life. So it's like the band Weather Report. That's how they, it's sort of like, we're playing whatever we're feeling is a reflection of us at this moment in time. You're not in a top 40 band where you memorize your parts and play them, the same over and over every night. There's the creativity, to just, the creativity is, is what it's really the main attraction about jazz. And, like Herbie Hancock and Wayne Shorter said in a book called Reaching Beyond, they said, jazz is really a music of freedom. And there's something very true and profound about that,
Absolutely. 100% agree. wants to get their hands on your Organ Trio live album or learn about live shows, anything about you, previous recordings, where can they go? Where's the best place?
Yes, so that great question. I appreciate asking that. First of all, the CD is now on Amazon as of about 3 days ago, and some other record outlets. I'm currently working on the digital, distribution, which I should have together within a week or 10 days. That'll be coming very shortly, though my previous albums are already on Spotify and iTunes and so forth and things like that, and as of today, I just hired a person to do my new website. I had a website years ago, but I let it, fall by the wayside. So it's going to probably in about 2 weeks, TownerGalaherMusic.com. And of course, it's important. A lot of people confuse my last name with Gallagher, but it's just Galaher, Galaher, TownerGalaherMusic.com. My website will be up and running, I'm sure within like 2 weeks. And like I said, the digital thing, is coming in a very, very short period of time, but it already is on Amazon.
Well, Towner, this has been wonderful, man. Thank you for taking time out to talk about your life and music. And it's great to meet you, man. Best of luck with
I loved all your questions. They were all really spot on, man, and thank you so much.
Thanks for tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players and minds in Portland, New York City, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. Thanks to Towner for his time, energy, and cool. If you want to hear more Neon Jazz interviews, go to Apple Podcast or Spotify. Subscribe to us at YouTube, and for everything Neon Jazz, go to theneonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.